The Soul series is very much about building your own stories, and there are a few things in particular down the pit that allow you to tell your own tale. So, I'm going to tell you a bit of a story, but while I tell it, I want you to notice how all the things I mention can be interpreted in different ways. So, the pit.
It's where the people around here toss all their rubbish. Corpses or you know what. Or whatever they'd rather be rid of.
The Grave of Saints is inhabited by the Rat King who commands a small army.
Inside the giant pit live the tiny beings that were once man's friends.
You've invaded the Rat King's burrow, and he has good reason to distrust humans.
Long ago, I struck an accord with a human chieftain. 'Twas agreed humans would rule the lands lapped by the sun's rays, and rats all that was below. But humans are liars all, schemers and cheats. The time came they broke their word and hunted us down. I had their word, the underworld was ours to rule, untouched as it is by the rays of the sun. The more humans coveted, the more blinded they became as to what truly mattered. And that is why I pity the fools called humans.
But you conquer his burrow, and he gives you the right to serve. You learn that rats have a very, very different view on the world, with different ideas about what's pure, that's for sure. And as you prove yourself to him, you learn that they once had another human amongst them.
Take this ring. It was forged by a human who was once among us.
The Ferrous Lockstone contraptions around the place and the ring that was forged make me think that the human might have been Pharaoh himself. Pharaoh the Vagabond was a legend who wandered the lands, creating contraptions to help those who were in dire and sincere need. The Rat King would have been one of these people, in need of defense from humans and kind of in need of restoring his own faith in humanity. I like to think that he built the traps in the Grave of Saints to help the Rat King, and that he crafted the crest of the rat for the Rat King to give to humans. For humans could activate the traps to defend the burrow, and who knows, maybe eventually trust in humans could be slowly repaired.
My servant, well met indeed. 'Twould seem some sunlight-poisoned creatures are worthy of great honor. Thou hast permitted me to dream. One day, rats and humans may yet live and die together in peace.
So, where do we find Pharaoh? Well, here's a perfect example of how the story branches out. Let's look at this skeleton here. It's placed really honorarily, and it almost makes me think that it could be Pharaoh, or perhaps it's a man named Haval who is referred to in the associated bonfire warp zone for this area. If it's even significant at all, then I personally lean towards it being Haval, since the bonfire refers to him having a resting place here, and you can just see this skeleton from below as you traverse this zone. Another reason I like to think it might be Haval is because I can imagine Pharaoh still being further below. Speaking of names, they call this place the Grave of Saints, and I'd say that the red phantom of one saint can be found further down. In New Game Plus, you are attacked by the red phantom of a cleric who wears the exact same armor as the Firekeeper in Dark Souls 1, down to the very bloodstained skirt that she wears.
Somebody told me that the grave of a saint lies below here. No, not built by the king, no. It date back to a time long before him.
So in Dark Souls 1, Anastasia was a firekeeper with the dingy set, and both set descriptions tell us that the smoke and the ashes of the bonfires have darkened them over the years. Anastasia's skirt was bloodstained, and I always took this to mean that Lautrec did this when he killed her, but I could be wrong on that, and maybe the bloodstain has to do with the fact that she was disfigured in some way. For we know that she had her tongue cut out so that she couldn't speak up against the lords. Either way, what appears to be the same character is here in the Grave of Saints, a place that existed way before the current king of this land. I don't know much about red phantoms in Dark Souls lore. In Demon Souls, they had an explanation, When you died in spirit form, you came back as a hostile red phantom. But in the Dark Souls universe, I guess the only way to see them is as hostile spirits or something like that. Moving on from that fairly indigestible piece of lore, let's talk about the gutter in general. I love this area. so it's frequently referred to as the place where everything unwanted or tossed away ends up. And honestly, this was my favorite area on my first playthrough. It's the first and, I reckon, the only area to make use of the lighting system, and just coming down here with a torch to help you see, and seeing the massive trash flowing down towards the bottom, it really conveyed this powerful theme of things being thrown away, and things that would never see the surface again. And this is really enforced by this one moment where you drop through a roof into what could actually be called a living area. You see rugs, pots, furniture. It's all these things that man would put around to make it more homely. And so all of a sudden, this family of hollows has you crash down into this home that they'd made for themselves. And it's this tiny, brief glimpse of humanity in a place that's notoriously devoid of it. And you crash through, and the hollows defend their home, and you cut them all down without a second thought, because this is Dark Souls, and you kill whatever's in front of you. And I had just been startled as I crushed through here, and I didn't take in my surroundings, I just wanted to survive. I killed everything that came at me, and then in the aftermath, I thought, and maybe you did too, that the little homely touches of this area were significant. Because sometimes we're not really the good guy in this game, you know? And this brief experience started to form the foundations of what I think about the gutter in general. I like to think that all the humans down here, you know, however they ended up here, whether they were just a hollowed corpse thrown down here so they wouldn't be seen again, I just think that maybe they were trying to build their way out with this wooden structure or something like that. And this thought, even though it's not confirmed, you know, it's just a brief thought that I had, it really gave more weight to this area for me. Another being in the gutter is the giant ant queen. The guide suggests that it began its life in Lord Aldia's laboratory and it eventually outlived its usefulness. It lays here, passive, docile, away from its natural habitat and discarded like everything else in the gutter. If you got poisoned by those little poisonous ticks that guard it, then maybe you noticed that it actually cures poison. And I really appreciate that they made it passive and looking away from you like that. You know, you're initially startled, you don't expect to see it, but then you really start to feel a little bit of pity for this misplaced creature. And then there are these statues put around the place. Gilligan reckoned that they might be the remnants of some pagan cult, but there is no real explanation for them. One theory I read online is that they represent the Emerald Herald. They look a fair bit like her, with the hood and the way they're posed. The fact that there's hundreds of them could make you think that they were created to honor someone, but honestly, in my opinion, I think they might have been created as more of an obsession than to honor someone. There's one of them being hung within the gutter, which is this really grim image, and there's another thing I came up with. You also have to consider that they spit poison, which could be fairly metaphorical for spitting lies, you know, vitriol. If it does represent the Herald, then perhaps someone created them out of spite. We know one character, at least, who thinks that the words of the Emerald Herald are a bunch of nonsense.
They say that she is the last firekeeper, but they say a lot of things. That she's a gentle shepherd, lighting the way for you cursed fools. Nonsense.
And finally, we get to the Rotten, who we disturb as he attempts to fix one of the statues. Is he responsible for them? Is this his obsession? Is this where he gets his happiness from? Maybe he's upset because we're the ones going through cutting all their heads off. In New Game Plus, you realize that he has the soul of the old dead one, which was Nito in Dark Souls 1. Just like Nito, he aggregates things to him to create a whole, but the Rotten is a bit more intriguing to me. When you wait outside his fog gate, you can actually hear him crying from outside, and I assume that this was all the tortured souls that were fused to him. When you cut off his left hand, he drops a Pharaoh's Lockstone, which has led a lot of people to believe that he might be Pharaoh, known for creating traps and maybe responsible for creating the statues. But ultimately, what do you think? You make your own story in the gutter, and that's kind of what I wanted to get at with this video. It's a good example of how the story can branch, and most of the ideas that you read in the comment section, I reckon they'll be pretty valid. But if you're looking for more solid interpretations of the lore, then check out my video I did recently on the overall story of Dark Souls 2. The story of the king and the queen is my favorite in a Souls game so far, and I think that you'll understand why if you've watched that video. If you're looking for more videos like these though, then you're gonna be in luck, because I think the next few weeks I'm going to devote to exploring the rest of Drangleic through story mode and through 10 things you missed, so that we can get a good understanding of the world before we start going a bit more in depth into each individual character. As usual though, thank you so much for watching and supporting and liking all these videos. As this channel grows, I feel like I can't necessarily respond to each individual one of you like I might have used to, but rest assured I do read the vast majority of your comments. I just don't have the time to reply to them all, and I really am proud of the mature fan base I have compared to some other people. My YouTube comment section is way better than a lot of others on YouTube, and I can really respect you all for that. So thanks guys, really. If you like, you can become a part of the small group that kindles this channel by clicking on the bonfire, so feel free to click and figure out what that's all about, but ultimately, I appreciate every single one of you watching, and other than that, I'll see you in the next one. Later guys.